this week's Parsha, we have the number enumerated exactly, the names of the 70 people who went down to Egypt. Yaakov Avinu, 69 of his descendants, and Yaakov was the 70th. Very clear, except for one thing. When it comes to the children of Yehuda, it says the following thing. Who b'nei Yehuda, the children of Yehuda were and Onan, Shelah, Peretz, V'Zorach. And and Onan died in Eretz Canaan, and then said the children of Peretz and Chetzron were this. Well, it doesn't make any sense. They never went down to Egypt. And Onan were the two oldest children of Yehuda. That's what we did in Parashat Vayeshev. They did sins to God. He killed them. And then Yehuda had 3 other children. He had one child before, and then he had 2 other children. And he had some grandchildren. Here it's meant some grandchildren. What does this have to do with? Why are they in the number of 70 Jews? They never went down to Egypt. They died in Eretz Canaan. This is many years later, too. They died in Eretz Canaan. To put the question otherwise, it's not only a problem here in Parshas Pinchas, where the Torah goes over the number of all the Jewish people and their families. It also talks about and Onan. And Onan, they're called Rishoim, wicked. And why it should be outside? It shouldn't be a page in our Jewish history. It's certainly not in the names of the 70 people who went down to Egypt. And when you talk about the 70 families of the Jewish people who left Egypt, then you're talking about the Jewish families. So it also says and Onan there. They don't belong there. They don't have any families. They both died childless, so they have no families, and they're not a family. Why is all that repeated? Does everybody find how compelling the question is? It doesn't have any seemingly rational pshat. We're learning Pirkei Avos, so somehow it always ties into the Parsha. And it says one of the things is modesty. The Torah Lishmo teach you modesty. What is really the definition of modesty? What does it mean to be a modest person? It's not a simple thing to define. What is modesty? Moshe Rabbeinu is the most modest of all people. What does it mean he was the most modest? He thought everybody was better than him? So when I was in the yeshiva, the answer was, no, he knows compared to God, he's nothing. By the way, I don't say that's not modest, if I don't think I'm God, that's already some level of modesty. The only problem is, Rashi brings in Chumash Chazal, Kol Mokem Shato Motzi God Luso, wherever you see the greatness of God, Shoma Ato Motzi An V'Sinuso. God is also modest, and Onov. Who's God comparing himself to? How could God? What do you mean God is modest? What does the word modest mean? What's the Jewish definition of modesty? Modesty is not a small character trait that we should really understand what it is. In fact, modesty is called the crown of all the character traits. You ask a person, what does define a modest person? Who is a modest person? What is a modest person? And what does it mean? And then after that, you have to understand, what does it mean God is modest? I guess there's some people think God is modest compared to them. I'd like to begin really a fascinating thing here. I want to read the sentences over. Well, let me start with one Gemara, because it's also relevant to here. The Talmud says in Yuma, Ein mamidim parnas al hatzibur, you did not put a leader over the Jewish people, elim kain yeshlo kupa shel shrotzim munach me'achorov, unless he has skeletons in his closet, skeletons in his back. And the reason for that is he shouldn't be too haughty. They look at him, who do you think you are? So a leader needs that, so he can't lord over the people. And if he understands that he has a whole package of things that he's ashamed of, therefore he'll treat the people with the respect they deserve. And therefore it's a condition. You can't appoint a leader over a community unless he has kupa shel shrutz and munach me'achorov, which is a little bit incredible when you think about how careful we are. In fact, it says the reason King David, his malchus, his kingship, went over to his children and went for all the generations, and Saul did not, because Saul didn't do any sins. And King David did sins. A little strange. It's almost a badge of honor to sin. So next time your child does something, it's a badge of honor. It's not a... Oh, now you can be a king. Now you can be a Jewish king. What does that mean? You have somebody who's pure and perfect in his life and not sinning, but they don't trust him to be a leader of the people. Excuse me?
He's saying he's going to be intolerant if he has no...
I'm just saying. But don't forget, whatever reason he didn't do any sins, he must be a pretty good person to begin with. So why do we suspect the person who's so far been perfect in his behavior that as soon as he becomes a king, he'll lord over people, and someone who's done sins, he'll be more modest to them? I'd like to begin reading the story. This is really fascinating here. I'm going back now to Parshas Vayeshev, when the story of and Onan apply. It says like this. There was this time, Yehuda went down from his brethren, and he saw a businessman, and he married his daughter, and she gave birth to somebody called That was the first son. She gave birth a second time to another boy called Onan. So now Yehuda has two children, and she gave birth to a third child, Shelah. So he had three children from this woman. And Yehuda took a wife for his first son, and her name was Tamar. She was actually the daughter of Shem, the son of Noah, a very royal, beautiful, aristocratic woman. And the firstborn son of Yehuda, was evil in the eyes of God, and God killed him. What does it mean he was evil in the eyes of God? She was so beautiful that he didn't want to culminate intimacy in her, lest, God forbid, she get pregnant. And therefore he spilled his zera, his semen, outside, because he didn't want her to get pregnant. And God killed him. He was evil. He had another son, and Yehuda said to him, marry the wife of your dead brother, marry Tamar, and do Leveret law. It wasn't an obligation, but it was something that the Ramban explains. It was something that was very common, and there was a spirit of Leveret law, and have children for your brother. And Onan knew that he would not be his children, so whenever he had relations with his wife, with his sister-in-law, he also did the same thing. He spilled his seed outside, so he should not give any children to her. Vayera b'einei Hashem, this was evil in the eyes of God, asher also what he did. Vayomas Gam Oso. So there's one very fascinating. He killed them both. One of them was he was evil, and what is the other one? What he did was evil. Very interesting. Torah doesn't use extra words; it's not necessary. So when we're talking about was evil, we Rabbi was evil in the eyes of God, and the other one by Onon it says it was bad in the eyes of God what he did. So who would you think is worse of two?
The first one.
The first one was worse. Yeah. Okay. Now then what happened? Yehuda did the Yibum. Yehuda took Tamar, and again, real Yibum has to be the brother, but the Ramban explains that it was the spirit of Yibum. So Yehuda took Tamar, who was also was the, he didn't know it, but it was the wife of his daughter-in-law really, but he also was Miyabim, his daughter-in-law, which is not a legal Yibum, but it's the same spirit of Yibum, and he had 2 children from her, twins. The Torah says like this. She's supposed to be put to death, and then he confessed it was him. A whole story. I'm not getting into that. So she gave birth, and there were twins inside. The first one stuck out his hand, and the birthing mother, not the midwife, tied a string around the hand, a red string, and said, "This one went out first. His hand was out first." And when he brought his hand back, his younger brother jumped first, and and that was Peretz. The first one who had the string on his finger was Zerach, and the other one was Peretz. And afterwards, his other brother went out, and he called him Zerach. So the first one to actually come out is Peretz. The first one who stuck his hand out was Zerach. Now, under Jewish law, birth is not when you stick your hand out. Birth is either most of your head and most of your body. So the one that was actually halachically born first is who? Peretz. All kingship in Israel comes from Peretz. When in the end of the book of Rosh, when it has all the generations, it goes from Yehuda Peretz. And the other one was Zerach. So very interesting. So we know from Peretz came kingship. Who's Zerach? The one in this, who had something on his finger. So the Medrash said this is a Yalkut Shimoni. If somebody wants to look it up. This is somebody who stole 5 times, who embezzled 5 times. And one of them is, let's say, in the story of Achan. Remember when the Jews invaded Israel, so the law was that they were not allowed to take anything from the property. It was God's, and he took property. That was one of his, and there's 3 more examples of doing the same thing. So Zerach. So who of the 2 sons, who would you say is better? I mean, Zerach had great tzaddikim from him too, but he also had very big rishonim from him. And Peretz, kingship comes from him. Who's the firstborn?
Peretz.
Firstborn is Peretz. The secondborn is Zerach. Who's the firstborn of Yehuda's children? And Onan. Now, if Yibum is in order to replace the ones that were born, which is what the Torah is telling us, the Torah is telling us about and Onan, they never went down to Egypt. But the Torah is telling us who Peretz and Zerach are. You have to know the families of Judah in the number 70, and later on when they left Egypt, is Peretz and Zerach. They're the families. But who is Peretz and Zerach? They're just names to us. But we have some background on them because they are the reincarnation of Er and Onan. That's why they're in the Torah. It's clear. Otherwise, it doesn't belong here, and it doesn't belong in Parshas Pinchas. The answer is, very strange. Between the two, who do we decide was worse, Er or Onan?
Er.
And yet, from Er comes kingship, and from Onan, who only did bad, comes what? Comes embezzlers. How do we understand that? The greater father, the worse father, became a king. And the one who did something bad, we all do things that are bad. Embezzlers come from him. Right? Peretz is the king. Zerach is the embezzler. Peretz comes from Er, who's evil in the eyes of God, and Zerach comes from Onan, who did something bad. That's a fascinating question. I'm going to tell you what I think is a fascinating answer and what I consider one of the most important principles of Torah. What kind of sin? What was Er's sin?
He wasted his seed.
No, what was the sin? For what reason did he spill his...
So Tamar would not
wouldn't have his brother's child.
No.
It's about protecting Tamar's life.
She's beautiful. She's beautiful. She's beautiful. The other one doesn't want to do because he doesn't want to do something for is something abnormal about... We're all physical. We have a body and we have a soul. They're two separate parts. But sometimes what a person does is do what? His body becomes his main thing, not his soul. If you're more interested in somebody's beauty than in the value of children, then somebody that's a normal physical desire. We struggle with physicality every day of our life. We have physical desires, we have spiritual desires, and very often the physical desires. But that's not abnormal, right? That's a normal part of a human being, and being physical. And you're supposed to be spiritual, but you make a choice, and sometimes your choice is physicality instead of spirituality. We understand that, right? What was Onan's sin? Why was he spilling his seed? Because he didn't want to do a favor for his brother. He didn't want to do his brother a favor. He wasn't. Torah is clear. It's not because he didn't want her to become pregnant. He didn't want to do his brother a favor.
That's worse.
What kind of problem was that?
Just spiritual. Selfish.
What do you mean? It's not spiritual. It's a character flaw. Not to care about my brother. Not to want to do something for my brother. To perpetuate his memory means there's a character flaw. Is a character flaw a physical, or that's an imperfect soul?
Imperfect soul.
That's a character flaws become imperfect flaws in my soul. What are flaws in that my body controls my soul? It's one thing. That's a physical. And that's a normal struggle of a human being. But when I don't care about another human being, and much less my brother, who should be perpetuated, who from the beginning of time there was a feeling we have to perpetuate, and Yehuda thought it was a very important thing to perpetuate a dead person's soul. That's an incredible spiritual flaw. That's a flaw in my soul. Flaws in my soul are character flaws. And this is what we all lose sight of. We lose sight of this distinction. He did something very terrible. Terrible. He did something human. That's not terrible. And he shouldn't have done it. But it's not a flaw in his soul. It's that his physicality took hold over his spirituality. But when you, let's say, abuse somebody, abuse is not a physical, normal thing. To abuse somebody is a flaw in my character. To abuse somebody is a flaw in my character. To put somebody down, make them feel bad, that's a flaw in my soul. That's much, much worse. That's what the Torah is telling us. You can't have a king. Yeah, kings can have physical flaws, but you can't have a king of Israel who has to give leadership who has a spiritual flaw, has character flaws. We shouldn't be voting for people with character flaws. People steal money. They have girlfriends. Okay, they're normal physical things. You know, people do. It's on drugs. You know, they get over it and they go further in life. But somebody who has a character flaw, that's a real flaw. That's a flawed person. So when you see your child eat an extra piece of cake or, grab something, it's one thing. But when you do a sin, but when you see him have no respect and no caring and no concern for another human being, bullying somebody, that's not a physical problem. That's not a physical flaw. That's a character flaw. He's not going to become worthy of becoming a king. He took 3 desserts. That's a physical flaw. He likes food, so he ate food. But he put somebody down. He didn't care about somebody that needed his help, especially his sibling. Then you're seeing a flaw in his soul. That has to be corrected. And that requires a lot of work to do that. A king of Israel can be, and it's important that he's human, so he won't lord over everybody. But somebody who has a spiritual flaw, you don't want him to be a king. Zerach, Peretz, was the king. He comes from a physical flaw. Yeah, he was Ra. He was evil. He let his physicality come over. Zerach did evil because he didn't care about somebody. His descendant becomes an embezzler. Embezzler wasn't about money. It was about a betrayal of trust. Right? Embezzlement is, I know somebody who, the worst thing is anybody, to be embezzled from somebody is terrible. It means you trusted the person. In fact, I heard from a person, I am so upset that my secretary embezzled $8,000. It was a multimillionaire. And he took it as such a violation of his trust. I trusted her. It's true. Nobody, in fact, can embezzle money unless you trust them. Right? When you put a person in position, whether it's the chief in your office, or right, your chief nurse, or the one who does your office manager, they can take money because you trust them. And to someone betray a trust, that's a huge character flaw. That person comes from a heir who didn't care about his brother, and therefore his descendant has character flaws. Do we have this clear? Story clear? And this is what I want to talk about. And this is the main thing of Yiddishkeit, is we all get caught up in what's he doing? He's on vacation. You know what he did? He ate French fries in a restaurant. He ate French fries in a restaurant. It's wrong. It's wrong. Or he ate fish in a restaurant. That's wrong. Yeah, it shows it's wrong for sure. He eats fish out. Okay. But a character flaw is when he doesn't respect other people. When he goes out of his way he dresses like an Orthodox Jew, but he asks him for help. The person needs help. He's not there for them. That's a character flaw. And that's the kind of person that you don't want to be a leader. And not only they shouldn't be your friends. We should pick friends. We don't need righteous friends. We need ehrliche friends. Ehrliche people are people that have honesty, integrity, caring, value Jewish people. Religious friends, of course, it'd be nice if they were both. But very often, religious friends feel they can do end runs around the law because they are religious. Okay, that's what I got to worry about that for. That's not who we are, and that's not what the definition of a Jew is. A Jew is somebody who cares about another Jew first. When the Jews came over in 1920, there wasn't one city that didn't have a free loan society. There wasn't one city that didn't provide burial for each other. That's because they were landslide at home. In America, everything became how religious you are, and that's a horrendous thing. How religious. Does he wear a black hat? I did a lot of shidduch in my life. I get calls all the time. Does he wear a black hat? That becomes a question. Does his mother cover her hair? I'm not talking about the ones that are grub and what kind of silverware she uses Shabbos, what kind of paper, what kind of cutlery she uses. I'm not talking about that. That's grub. That I recommend just keep away from them. But even where it's, dressed in religious terms, does he do this? Or are they decent people? If somebody needs help, are they the first to give help? And there's a very small correlation between religion. Today, there's a very small correlation between religion and helping other people. A very small correlation. There's a lot of people that aren't observant. Between observance. That's real religion, but observance is not religion at all. I was talking to somebody this morning I know for 40 years, and I know him in Miami since 1977, 78. And, it's just shocking. It's just shocking. There's very few people that care about people. They're just how religious you are, and that's all they want to know, how religious they are for shidduchim. It's the wrong questions to ask. That's not what you should be looking for. That doesn't make a difference at all. It's really, you want a quality child, future daughter-in-law, or future son-in-law. Are they people that care about people? They have Jewish values. Not how religious they are. Not how many years they spent in Beis Yaakov or Yeshiva. How religious. Not how religious they are. You can call it religion. It is religion. But not how observant they are. That's irrelevant. It's wonderful if they're both. If everything else is in place, so you find out they're also observant, that's great. That's great. But between the two, it's not even a question who you should choose. Between observances and character is number 100. Observances is number 1. It's just it's not relevant at all. It's just not relevant. You want a mensch, but you want somebody with character. And character is what the cement of the marriage is. Character is a cement of relationship with your parents. Character is with your children. Your character, not your observances. Observances are totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. It's wonderful to have both, but we're living in a time. In fact, what he was arguing with me, there's so many more people learning. That's not learning. If the Torah doesn't teach you anything, I don't want to hear the numbers that are here. That's not learning. Many more people learning now than there were 100 years ago. It's not true. There's more people sitting in Yeshiva, sitting in school, but that's not learning. Learning is how much the Torah teaches you, how much you learn from the Torah. It's called Talmud Torah. You have to be the student of the Torah. Not about sitting and learning. That's sitting and studying a subject. It's how much you're being affected by what you study. We have to look for students that have character. That's what's saying now what anivus is. Anivus is a trait of it's the crown of all the traits. And the main thing is the king should be an honor. It means the king should understand that he makes mistakes too. He makes mistakes too. And one thing, the one who's the biggest, made the biggest mistake in the universe. And not only he admits to making this mistake. He created the Yetzer Hara. That we have an excuse to God. What do you want from me? God, you created the evil inclination. What do you want from me? It's just a way of saying that, yeah, I gave you the Yetzer Hara, but if you do too many sins, it's my fault. God is very modest. God is extremely modest. God doesn't consider, I'm not going to say God, the one we have a relationship with, Elohim, is extremely modest. Elohim has tremendous modesty. Wherever you see his greatness, he remembers he makes mistakes too. And he blames himself. It's in a way of, in the anthropomorphic way of saying that he doesn't blame us for things that he did. He put into us evil inclination, but not the evil inclination of character flaws, that he didn't put into us any character flaws. That's our invention. And the Shomash and the Sata that he gave us to Horah, that's pure, perfect. The goof, the body is the struggle between body and soul. It's a real struggle. So if you sin, God forgives us for that. He blames himself for that. Ki yetzer leiv adam ra minurav. From the time we're born, God put into us a evil inclination. And that creates our sin. So he's taking responsibility for that. But one thing he's not taking responsibility, he'll never take responsibility, is put an imperfect character. That's the invention of man. God gave us a soul that's perfect. And when we have flaws in our character, we have lacks in our soul. And that's our invention. That's our invention. And most of us, who comes near before Rosh Hashanah, you start listing, I don't do this, I don't do that, I don't do the other thing. That's not what it's about. It's about figuring out what our character is. And it's hard to know what our character is because we like to go into denial. It's easy to measure what we do. I don't go to shul enough times. Maybe when I'm on a vacation, I don't dress the way I should. That's all. And that's all we're thinking about. Instead of, am I there for my siblings? Am I there for my community? Are they there for Jews in Israel? Who am I? And that's a very hard question, and we don't want to face that question, but that's the only thing we have to face. It's much easier just to be a robot, tell me what to do, and I measure what I'm doing. But to figure out who I am, that's that we're not too happy about having to do. But that's really what our responsibility is. We're not supposed to be robots. God created us to make choices, and he wants us to be responsible for our choices. And the only choices we're responsible for are the choices of character. Every other he takes responsibility. I created the Yitzhar. God says that was my fault. Not fault. That's the only way the whole system works, obviously. But character choices, that's what we have to know. And you know what? The only one who knows what our character is who? Who?
God and us.
The person himself. The only one who really knows the character is themselves. What were you really thinking? What were you really wanted to do? Were you really trying to help the person? You're just making excuses to avoid helping a person. It's the level of responsibility that's unbelievable. And that's what the Torah trusts us to make that choice, to make that examination. It's not about measuring what we're doing, which is obvious, but it's about who I am. And Be'ezus Hashem, if we keep on learning Torah the way we should, and we're going to go through the 48 ways pretty soon, then we'll begin to understand who we are. Everybody should have a great Shabbos.